My own brother Floyd watched with cold eyes as the ink dried, sealing the fate of our family's ranch. The golden fields, generations of sweat and love, lost to a rigged poker game while I was serving our country. I came home a war hero, but an outcast in my own town, the ground beneath my feet no longer ours. They thought they'd broken me, left me with nothing but a bitter taste. But they had no idea I'd found a secret place to rebuild, a place they'd soon regret overlooking. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. The air back home always smelled different, a mix of pine and dry earth that pulled at my chest. My old pickup rattled, carrying me from the coast, every mile filled with pictures of the Golden Fields Ranch, shimmering under the Montana sun. I'd fought for this land, for this way of life, and now I was finally bringing myself home. My heart thumped as I drove down the familiar dirt road, dust blooming behind me. The tall cottonwoods whispered secrets, but something felt off. The sturdy red gate to our driveway was gone, replaced by a fancy wrought-iron monstrosity with a big, ugly B twisted into the metal. My foot eased off the gas, the truck sputtering to a halt. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I climbed out, the silence pressing in. The sun was warm, but a chill ran right through me. My fingers traced the cold metal of the new gate, my mind screaming. This wasn't our gate. As I stood there, bewildered, Floyd emerged from the porch of the main house. My brother. He looked thinner, his shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed. He just stared, no joy, no surprise, just resignation. "Raymond," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't move to greet me. "Floyd, what in the blazes is going on?" I asked, rougher than I meant. I waved a hand at the new gate. "What happened to the ranch? What's that ugly gate doing here?" He walked slowly towards me, boots kicking up dust. When he was close, I saw the deep shame in his eyes. "It's not ours anymore, Raymond," he confessed, voice cracking. I lost it. To Clifford Bates, in a poker game. A poker game? Our family's legacy, gone on a turn of cards? My hands clenched, knuckles white. The blood rushed to my ears, a hot, angry hum. "A poker game? Floyd, 3 generations, you just gambled it away?" Before Floyd could answer, a smooth, confident voice cut through the tension. Well, if it isn't Raymond Finch back from his travels." Clifford Bates stepped out from behind Floyd, a wide, practiced smile plastered on his face. He wore a fancy suit, his slick hair glinting. He moved with an unsettling ease, like a predator. "Clifford," I gritted out, the name tasting like ash. He had always been around, a shadow at the edges of town, too smooth, too eager to lend money. "I understand you're a bit surprised," Clifford said, his smile never wavering, but his eyes were cold as river stones. "But your brother, Floyd, he made a deal, a fair game, all above board, and I won." He swept a hand across the horizon. "It's mine now, Raymond, all mine." Floyd just stood there, shoulders slumped, unable to meet my gaze. I looked from Clifford's smug face to Floyd's defeated one. This wasn't just a poker game. This felt like a carefully laid trap. My home, my history, gone. The pain was sharp, but it hardened into something else. I might have lost the ranch today, but I wasn't about to lose everything. Clifford's smile widened. "So, Raymond, what are your plans now? Going to leave this dusty old town behind for good?" I met his gaze, my eyes sparking. My voice was low, steady, a promise wrapped in steel. "This dusty old town is my home, Clifford, and I'm not going anywhere." He chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "We'll see about that, veteran. This town changes fast, and there's no room for sentiment in progress. He looked me up and down like a broken tool. My eyes swept over the landscape, now foreign under his ownership. I wasn't just losing a ranch, I was losing a piece of myself. But a new path was calling me, a path high above. They had taken my home, but they hadn't seen the fortress I was about to build, high above them all. Clifford's smug face burned in my memory as I turned my back on the fancy new gate. Floyd didn't follow me. He just stood there, a ghost of the brother I used to know. The ranch, my home, felt like a stranger's house now. Every creak of the floorboards, every breath of air felt wrong. I couldn't stay, not like this, not under his watchful, sneering eyes. I walked through the house, each step heavy, my boots echoing in rooms that used to hum with life. I didn't take much, just a worn leather satchel with my grandpa's old compass, a few faded photos, and the heavy wool blanket my mama had knitted for me when I was just a boy. The familiar scent of wood smoke and old books still clung to the fabric, a comfort and a torment all at once. I grabbed my tools, my axe, a sturdy hammer, a saw, and strapped them into the back of my old truck, the metal clinking a mournful tune. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, but the air felt cold, a biting wind pushing at my back like it wanted to hurry me along. The old pickup coughed to life, the engine a familiar rumble against the knot of anger and sorrow in my stomach. I took one last look at the golden fields, the way the last light of day turned the fields into something truly golden, just as its name promised. My chest ached. It wasn't just a ranch I was leaving, it was a piece of my soul. But I wouldn't be broken, I wouldn't give Clifford Bates the satisfaction. I steered the truck away from the main road, heading towards the hills, towards the wild, untamed edges of our valley. The road grew narrower, bumpier, just a dusty track, winding up higher and higher. The air thinned, carrying the crisp scent of pine and damp earth. No one really bothered with Echo Canyon Rim. It was too steep, too rugged, too far from town for most folks. They called it God's Forgotten Corner, and usually they were right. It was a place for mountain goats and lonely hawks, not for people. But as I climbed, a strange sort of calm started to settle over me. The truck grumbled, fighting every incline, but I kept pushing. Finally, I reached a small, flat clearing, barely big enough for my truck to turn around. The ground was rocky and uneven, dotted with tough scrub brush and ancient, gnarled junipers. Above me, the canyon walls rose like giant, silent guardians. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was immense, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the canyon and the distant cry of an owl. I stepped out, stretching my stiff legs. The air was sharp and clean, biting at my nose. I walked to the edge of the clearing and my breath caught in my throat. Below me, the valley stretched out, a vast tapestry of greens and browns, dotted with the tiny lights of town. And there, nestled in the heart of it all, was the Golden Fields Ranch, its buildings looking like miniature toys from up here. I could almost make out the outline of the main house, the one Clifford Bates now called his own. A cold fire sparked in my belly. From this high up I could see everything, watch everything without being seen. This remote spot, this forgotten corner, it felt like a beginning, not an end. It was here, on Echo Canyon Rim, that I would build my high watch, a place from which I would reclaim what was stolen. The night on Echo Canyon Rim was colder than I remembered any Montana night. The wind howled like a hungry wolf through the gaps in the rocks, tugging at my worn jacket and trying to steal the warmth right out of me. I huddled in the cab of my truck, the engine long dead, trying to catch a few hours of sleep, but every creak and groan of the metal felt like a ghost whispering in my ear. When the first sliver of dawn painted the eastern sky in soft greys and pinks, I crawled out, stiff and chilled to the bone. The ground was hard under my boots, a mix of jagged rock and gritty soil that clung to everything. I walked to the canyon's edge again, wrapping my arms around myself, and watched the valley slowly wake up. From here, the Golden Fields Ranch looked peaceful, almost inviting, but I knew the poison that now lurked within its fences. A bitter taste filled my mouth. This place, Echo Canyon Rim, was nothing like the fertile, soft ground of the ranch. It was raw, unyielding, and utterly lonely. Most folks would have taken one look and turned tail, heading for the comfort of town, no matter how small. They'd see only the harshness, the back-breaking work, the sheer impossibility of making a home here. But I wasn't most folks. Years in the service had taught me to see beyond the surface, to find strength in unexpected places, to make a plan even when everything felt like it was crumbling. I ran my hand over the rough bark of a pine tree, its needles sharp against my skin. These weren't the easy-to-cut trees from the lower slopes. These were tough, wind-battered warriors, their wood dense and strong, perfect for building. I kicked at a pile of loose stone, grey and solid. There was plenty of it, just waiting to be shaped. I spent the whole day walking the rim, my eyes scanning every nook and cranny. The air smelled of pine resin and damp earth, a wild, clean scent. I found a natural spring hidden under an overhang, its water clear and cold, bubbling up from the earth like a tiny secret. It was small, but enough for one man. Then I found it. A spot nestled against a sheer rock face, sheltered from the worst of the wind, where the ground was just flat enough, just big enough for a small cabin. It wasn't fancy, not by a long shot, but it was defensible. From that spot, I could see anyone coming for miles down the valley road, and I could still see the ranch, a constant reminder of what I had lost and what I was fighting to get back. The sun started to dip below the western peaks, casting long, purple shadows across the canyon. My stomach growled, but I barely noticed. A quiet determination was growing inside me, pushing out the chill and the sorrow. This wasn't just a desolate rock. It was a vantage point, a fortress waiting to be born. It was a place where I could be free, where I could think, where I could plan without Clifford Bates's sneering gaze upon me. It might be hard, harder than anything I'd ever done, but I knew deep down in my bones that this was where I belonged now. This barren, beautiful rim, it would be my new home, my high watch, and from its lonely perch, I would wage my silent war. The first swing of my axe against the rough bark of a fallen pine was a jolt, sending vibrations right up my arms. It felt good, the shock of it, a clean, honest ache after the hollow pain of losing the golden fields. I worked from sunup to sundown, and then some, using the pale moonlight as my guide when the clouds allowed. My hands, once soft from paperwork and planning back in the war, quickly grew rough and calloused, thick with splinters that I'd pick out by the glow of a small lantern. Every log I wrestled into place, every stone I chipped and fitted, was a prayer, a promise, a silent act of defiance against Clifford Bates. The air on Echo Canyon Rim was always crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles warmed by the sun and the damp, earthy smell of the rocks. There were days the wind sang through the canyon like a mournful hymn, and other days it was quiet, only the scrape of my saw or the rhythmic thud of my hammer breaking the vast silence. I learned to love that quiet. It was a different kind of peace than the ranch had offered, a harder, more earned kind. Up here, I could think. I could watch the valley spread out beneath me, a patchwork quilt of greens and browns, and pick out the familiar shapes of the ranch buildings now tiny in the distance. They were always there, a flicker of light at night, a constant, burning reminder of what I had to do. I moved slow and careful, like a fox in a hen house, never wanting to draw attention. I hauled timber from the upper slopes, mostly deadfall, dragging the heavy logs piece by piece to my chosen spot. My back ached, my muscles screamed, but I pushed through it, fueled by a stubborn fire deep inside me. I shaped the sturdy frame from thick pine, then began layering stone for the base, mortaring each one with mud I mixed from the spring, creating a strong foundation against the biting winds. The cabin started to take shape, not fancy, not grand, but solid, like a good man's word. It was small, just one room, but it was going to be my sanctuary, my high watch. Evenings were spent sharpening tools by the light of a tiny fire, the smell of coal and steel mingling with the pine. I ate simple meals, dried jerky, hardtack, and drank the cold, clean spring water. The stars up here were something else, like scattered diamonds on black velvet, so bright you felt you could reach out and touch them. Lying wrapped in my mama's wool blanket, the familiar scent a balm to my weary soul, I often stared up at them, feeling both utterly alone and completely connected to something bigger. This solitude wasn't a punishment. It was a meditation, a forging of purpose. Every nail I hammered, every joint I cut was a quiet step toward reclaiming my family's legacy. Weeks turned into a couple of months. The cabin, my high watch, was almost finished, snug and sturdy against the harsh elements. I'd built a small, thick door and cut out a single window perfectly angled to look down over the golden fields. It felt like my very own fortress, a secret whispered to the wind. One afternoon, just as the sun was dipping low and I was tightening the last few planks on the roof, a strange sound drifted up from the valley below. It wasn't the usual wind or an animal call. This was a low rumble, the faint chug of an engine, much louder and closer than the highway sounds. My heart gave a sudden lurch, thumping against my ribs. I froze, my hand tight on the hammer. The sound grew, then stopped abruptly, closer to the canyon walls than it had any right to be. A prickle ran down my spine. Had someone finally seen something? Was someone else climbing this lonely path? The low rumble had stopped, leaving a heavy silence in its wake, broken only by my own ragged breathing. I gripped the hammer, my knuckles white, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct I had, honed in places far away from this peaceful canyon, screamed danger. I dropped down from the roof, moving with silent caution towards the edge of the clearing, scanning the winding path below. The air smelled of dry pine needles and something else now, a faint whiff of gasoline and old exhaust. Then, through the gnarled junipers, a shape emerged. It wasn't a sleek black pickup like Clifford Bates would drive, nor was it the dusty, dented sedan of a sheriff. It was an old, faded blue station wagon, the kind with fake wood paneling on the sides, coughing slightly as it came to a halt. And out of it, slowly, carefully, stepped Dorothy Hollis. Dorothy. She was a wisp of a woman, smaller than I remembered, with a halo of soft white hair that seemed to catch the last rays of the sun. She wore a sensible, patterned dress and a worn cardigan, and her bright, kind eyes, crinkled at the corners from years of smiling, found me instantly. In her frail hands, she carried a wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth. The sight of her, so utterly out of place on this rugged rim, yet so familiar, made a strange warmth bloom in my chest, pushing back some of the tension. "Raymond, dear," she called out, her voice a gentle flutter. "I heard you were back. And well, your grandmother always said you had a stubborn streak, just like her. So I figured if anyone was going to hole up in God's forgotten corner, it would be you. She smiled, a soft, knowing curve of her lips. I lowered the hammer, feeling a foolish grin tug at my own lips. "Dorothy," I managed, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "What in the blazes are you doing all the way up here?" She just chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Someone had to check on you, didn't they? And bring you something proper to eat. That jerky you've been living on, well, it's no food for a growing boy, let alone a war hero." She carefully navigated the uneven ground towards my cabin, her gaze taking in the rough-hewn walls and the sturdy, fresh wood. "You've been busy. A fine little fort you've built yourself, Raymond." She uncovered the basket, and the most wonderful smell wafted up. Fresh-baked apple pie, warm and sweet, mingling with the earthy scent of the pine. She also had a thermos of hot coffee, strong and black, just how I liked it. It was like a little piece of home had been brought to my desolate perch. My stomach rumbled loudly and I felt a blush creep up my neck, but Dorothy just smiled again, pouring me a steaming mug. As I devoured a slice of pie, the warmth spreading through me, Dorothy settled on a nearby rock, sipping her coffee. "You know, Raymond," she began, her gaze fixed on the valley below. "Your grandmother and I, we saw a lot of things change in this town. Most folks just see the surface, the pretty smiles and the big promises. But the land, it remembers. And the old papers, they remember too." She paused, taking another slow sip, letting her words hang in the crisp air. "Clifford Bates, he's a lot like his grandpappy, Old Man Bates. Always had an eye for what wasn't his. I remember when Old Man Bates bought the Miller's Creek lumber mill. Folks said the owner, a man named Henderson, was deep in debt, but he fought tooth and nail to keep that mill, said it was his family's pride. But then all of a sudden he just gave up, signed it all over, left town with nothing but the clothes on his back. A week later, Old Man Bates owned it all. The very next year, a big new highway went right past that mill, making it worth 10 times what it was." My pie forgotten, my blood ran cold. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "He forced him out?" I asked, a dark suspicion tightening its grip around my heart. Dorothy shrugged gently. "Some folks called it good business. But your grandmother, she called it plain wickedness. Said the Bates family had a way of finding folks' weaknesses and then twisting them till they broke. She swore Henderson didn't just lose that mill, she said he was ruined on purpose by the Bates. A vital clue about Clifford's past. The warmth of the coffee, the sweetness of the pie, the comforting presence of Dorothy. It all coalesced into something powerful. I wasn't just fighting a crooked poker game anymore. I was fighting a long, ugly history, a pattern of calculated destruction. And for the first time since I'd lost the Golden Fields, a flicker of something beyond just anger sparked inside me. I wasn't alone. Dorothy's quiet words, her steady gaze, filled a void I hadn't even realized was there. But her story, gentle as it was, painted a far more sinister picture than I had ever imagined, revealing a dark current running beneath our town's history, a current that now threatened to drown me. After Dorothy left, her gentle warmth lingered in the cabin, a soft counterpoint to the hard edges of my new life. The apple pie, tucked away in my small food locker, was a sweet reminder that I wasn't entirely alone, but the quiet certainty of her words about Clifford Bates, about his family's long history of ruin, settled deep in my bones like a cold stone. This wasn't just about a poker game anymore. This was a pattern, a slow, patient rot eating away at the heart of our valley. My high watch became my eyes and ears. From dawn until the last sliver of twilight, I watched. I built a small, sturdy perch by my window where I could sit for hours with my grandpa's old spyglass. The cold metal of the spyglass felt familiar against my cheek, and through its clear lens, the valley below opened up like a giant storybook. The air was often still, heavy with the scent of dry earth and sun-baked pine. Sometimes a hawk would circle high above, its keen eyes seeing everything just like mine. I watched the ranch, the golden fields. Clifford Bates had wasted no time. New fences went up, shiny and tight, marking his claim with a harsh finality. He brought in big, unfamiliar machinery that rumbled like thunder, tearing up land that had always been treated with gentle hands. I saw men I didn't recognize, rougher types, moving around with an air of authority. Floyd, my brother, was a rare sight, and when I did spot him, he looked smaller, more hunched, like a shadow of himself. The fields, once a sea of vibrant green, seemed to take on a duller hue, a tired yellowish-brown, even from this distance. The town, too, was changing. Through the spyglass, I'd watch the main street. Fewer folk seemed to linger, to chat outside the general store. The smiles I remembered seemed a little thinner, a little more forced. I saw Clifford Bates's fancy car parked outside the bank more often, or outside the mayor's office. He'd stride through town, his tailored suits looking out of place against the dusty backdrop, shaking hands, a practiced smile on his face, but his eyes, even from far away, still held that cold, calculating glint. It was like he was a spider, slowly, carefully, spinning his web around everything. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. The days stretched into weeks, each one a slow, silent observation. The sun beat down relentlessly day after day, baking the earth harder and harder. The grass, already losing its green, started to crackle underfoot when I walked. The air grew thick with dust that coated everything. I could feel the change up on the rim. My spring, once a lively trickle, was slowing, just a hesitant drip now. The creek that usually babbled down the canyon walls was reduced to a few damp stones. The wildlife, usually plentiful, became scarce, their thirst pushing them elsewhere. Then one scorching afternoon, as I focused my spyglass on the river that snaked through the valley, the river that fed the golden fields and all the surrounding farms, my blood ran cold. The water level was drastically lower than I had ever seen it. Patches of mud and dry riverbed, usually hidden beneath the flow, were now exposed, cracked and parched in the brutal sun. And right there, near the new boundary Clifford had set for the ranch, a group of his men were digging. They weren't planting or ploughing. They were digging a trench, a deep, wide ditch, clearly intended to divert what little water remained, pulling it straight towards the golden fields, away from everyone else downriver. My blood ran cold as I watched Clifford Bates's men digging that trench, rerouting what little water there was. It wasn't just a betrayal of our family anymore. It was a betrayal of the whole valley, a greedy grab that would leave our neighbors, the very heart of this community, parched and broken. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a boiling rage that started in my gut and spread through every inch of me. The dust from their digging rose in a cloud, a grim shroud over the dying land. I pulled away from the spyglass, the cold metal feeling like a brand against my skin. The air in my high watch was thick with the scent of dry pine and my own anger. I paced the small cabin, my boots thudding on the rough-hewn floorboards, trying to keep my head clear, to think. But all I could see was that trench sucking the life out of everything. Then a sound. A familiar cough of an engine, much closer than last time, slowly making its way up the treacherous path to the rim. My heart leapt into my throat. Who would be foolish enough to come all the way up here, especially now? I grabbed my grandpa's old hunting rifle from where it leaned against the wall, its familiar way to comfort, and moved silently to my single window, peering out through the narrow opening. It was Floyd, my brother. His old beat-up truck, the one he'd kept even after losing the ranch, groaned to a halt in my small clearing. He climbed out, looking even more haggard than before, his shoulders slumped, his clothes dusty. He scanned the area nervously like a cornered animal, and then his eyes landed on my cabin, on the high watch I'd built with my own hands. A flicker of something, surprise, fear, maybe even a ghost of relief, crossed his face. I stepped out onto my small porch, rifle held loosely, but ready. The late afternoon sun beat down, harsh and unforgiving, turning the dust around us to shimmering gold. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the rapid thumping of my own heart. "Floyd," I said, my voice flat, holding back the storm inside me. He flinched, as if I'd struck him. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Raymond," he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. I heard rumors. Folks saying you were up here. Didn't think it was true, not really." He looked around at the sturdy timber and stone, the small, fortress-like cabin. "You really built this?" "With my own 2 hands," I confirmed, my gaze unwavering. "Unlike some, I still know how to work." The jab was cruel, but I couldn't help it. The sight of him, a living reminder of all we'd lost, twisted a fresh knot in my stomach. He winced. "Look, Raymond, you can't be here, not out in the open like this. Clifford, he'll find out." He glanced back down the path, as if expecting Bates himself to come charging up. "He already found out about the golden fields, didn't he?" I shot back, my voice rising a little. "He found out our weakness, and he took everything. Now he's taking the water too, Floyd, from everyone." Floyd paled. "The water? What are you talking about?" "I saw his men," I practically hissed, pointing vaguely towards the valley. "Digging a trench, diverting the river, so his damn ranch gets every last drop, and everyone else below him gets nothing but dust." He shook his head, a mixture of fear and denial in his eyes. "No, he wouldn't. He told me he was just improving the irrigation for the new crops." "New crops or not, Floyd, you can't just steal the river. That water belongs to everyone." My voice softened a little, a plea in it now. "Did he tell you to come up here? Is that it? Are you still doing his dirty work?" Floyd looked at his boots, shuffling his feet in the dust. He just sent me to check on a rumor about an old prospector up here. Said he heard there was someone squatting. He's got ears everywhere, Raymond." He looked up, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "You need to leave. Please. If he finds out you're here, watching him, he'll do worse than just take the ranch. He'll ruin you. He'll ruin us all." My jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving, Floyd. This is my home now, and I'm not going to let him ruin this valley." He just stared, his face a mask of desperation. "He'll send people, Raymond. He'll send men. You can't fight him, not alone." He paused, his eyes sweeping over my fortress one last time, a strange mix of reluctant admiration and stark terror on his face. Then he turned and climbed back into his truck, the engine coughing to life again. He threw one last haunted look my way. "I have to go, Raymond," he called out, his voice thin. "He'll be looking for me. But he's going to know about this place, and he won't forget it." He backed the truck up, turned around with a grind of gears, and headed back down the winding path, leaving me alone with the dust, the dying sun, and the chilling certainty that my secret high watch was no longer a secret at all. Floyd's frantic words echoed in the quiet of my high watch, mixing with the low hum of anxiety that had taken root in my gut. Clifford Bates knew about me, about my secret place. That changed everything. I stood by the window, my gaze sweeping over the parched valley, the spyglass now a constant extension of my arm. The sun beat down with a relentless fury I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just hot, it was a heavy, suffocating heat that stole your breath and made the air shimmer above the cracked earth. The drought, which had been a creeping shadow, was now a monster with sharp claws tearing at the landscape. Through my spyglass, the golden fields, once a beacon of green, was turning a desperate yellow-brown, just like everything else. But Clifford's fields, thanks to that stolen water, still held a faint, sickly green. The sight of it, knowing he was thriving while the rest of the valley withered, made my teeth clench. Day after day, the sky remained a cruel, cloudless blue. The air grew thick with dust that coated everything, clinging to the needles of the pines, settling on the windows of my cabin. Every breath I took felt dry, rasping in my throat. The little spring near my high watch, once a clear trickle, was now barely a damp spot on the rock, a single drop forming, hesitant and slow. The silence on the rim grew heavier, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind or the distant, desperate cry of a thirsty coyote. The wildlife had mostly vanished, driven away by the lack of water. I watched the ranch, now a mirror of the struggle below. The powerful pumps Clifford had installed worked non-stop, a constant low thrum that I could faintly hear even from my high perch, pulling the diverted river water to his greedy fields. The river itself, once a vibrant artery, was now a pathetic trickle, exposing vast stretches of sun-baked mud. The banks were cracked and curling like old parchment. Then I shifted my spyglass to the other farms downriver, the ones that had always relied on that water. Their fields were a desolate wasteland. What little crop had managed to sprout was now brittle and dead, bowing under the crushing weight of the sun. I saw farmers, their faces lined with worry, standing in their bone-dry fields, kicking at the dust. Their cattle, once plump and healthy, looked gaunt, their ribs showing through their hide, their heads hanging low in despair. I could practically feel their desperation, even from miles away. The air wasn't just hot, it felt heavy with sorrow. Clifford Bates was holding this valley hostage, slowly squeezing the life out of it, all while my brother Floyd was probably still caught in his web. The injustice of it all burned in my chest, a fire that refused to be quenched. Then one particularly brutal afternoon, as the sun beat down with an almost physical force, turning the world into a hazy, shimmering mirage, I saw something new. Smoke, a thin, sickly plume rising from the direction of Old Man Henderson's farm, one of the smaller, struggling places downriver from Clifford's ranch. It wasn't a big fire, not yet, but it was enough to catch my breath. The drought had made everything so tinder dry, a single spark could ignite a catastrophe. Minutes later, the faint, wailing sound of a distant siren reached my ears, quickly joined by another, and then another. It was a mournful, urgent sound cutting through the heavy silence of the valley. My hand, still holding the spyglass, started to shake. I swung the lens back towards the river, towards the farms. The smoke was growing thicker, darker, and then through the hot, shimmering air, carried on the desperate dry wind, I heard it. Faint at first, but growing louder, carried by the panic of the moment. Voices, screaming, distant, terrified cries for help, echoing across the parched valley. The cries from the valley below ripped through me like a physical blow. That thin smoke, now thicker, hung like a shroud over Henderson's farm. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. There was no time to think, no time for caution. My high watch had given me sight, but now it demanded action. I grabbed my old canteen, filled it with the last precious drops from my spring, and practically threw myself down the treacherous path, my boots slipping on the loose shale, sending small avalanches of rock tumbling ahead of me. The dry air burned my lungs with every gasping breath. When I finally burst out of the trees and onto the flat, parched land of Henderson's place, the scene was worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't a roaring inferno, but a smaller, meaner fire licking at the dry straw of an old shed, embers spitting into the tinder-dry fields. The screams weren't just about the fire. They were screams of raw desperation, of people fighting over a near-empty water trough, their faces smeared with dust and despair. Old man Henderson himself was on his knees, weakly trying to beat back the flames with a tattered blanket, his face ashen, his body trembling with exhaustion and defeat. His wife, Phyllis, was huddled by the house, clutching a small child, tears carving clean streaks down her dusty cheeks. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the pungent smell of burning wood. Then I saw him. Clifford Bates, standing a little apart from the chaos, perfectly clean in a light suit, watching it all with a detached, almost satisfied expression. His arms were crossed, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. He hadn't come to help. He had come to witness the collapse he'd engineered. My eyes narrowed, the anger coiling tight in my gut. I moved, not towards Clifford, but towards Phyllis and the child. They needed water, comfort, something. As I knelt to offer my canteen, Clifford's voice cut through the air, smooth and condescending. "Well, well, Raymond Finch, playing the hero again. Some things never change." I ignored him, gently urging Phyllis to drink, the child whimpering against her shoulder. "We need to get this fire out," I yelled, turning to the few men who were standing around, helpless, "and get these folks some water." Just then, as if summoned by some unseen force, a dusty blue station wagon chugged slowly into the yard, stirring up a fresh cloud of dust. It was Dorothy Hollis. She looked small, almost fragile, but her eyes held a spark of determined fire. She climbed out, not with a bucket of water, but clutching a worn leather satchel, her gaze sweeping over the scene, then landing squarely on Clifford Bates. "Clifford," she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying surprisingly well in the suddenly hushed yard. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth, don't you?" Clifford's casual smile faltered, a flicker of something uneasy in his eyes. "Dorothy, what on earth are you talking about? Can't you see we have a crisis here?" "Oh, I see it, all right," Dorothy replied, her voice gaining a surprising edge. "And I see the cause, too. This drought may be God's doing, but this despair, this is yours. And your grandpappy's?" She opened her satchel and pulled out a stack of old, yellowed papers. "I found these, Raymond. Old tax records, water rights permits, the original deeds for Miller's Creek, and a few notes from your grandmother, God rest her soul. All about how old man Bates manipulated those permits, how he bankrupted poor Mr. Henderson to get that mill just before the highway went in." She held up one specific document, its edges brittle with age. "And here's the kicker, Clifford. The original water rights for this entire section of the valley, long before your family owned the Golden Fields. It clearly states the primary allocation of water from the river goes to the farms downriver first. Your trench? It's illegal. Always has been." A gasp went through the small crowd, followed by a low murmur. Clifford's face, usually so smooth, hardened into a mask of pure fury. His eyes, fixed on Dorothy, were like chips of ice. He took a single, slow step towards her, his hand clenching into a fist. The air crackled with a sudden, dangerous tension. Dorothy, however, didn't flinch. She simply held the papers out, her hand steady, a beacon of quiet defiance. "These aren't just old papers, Clifford," she said, her voice now a clear bell. "They're the truth, and everyone in this valley deserves to hear it." Clifford stood there, a terrible silence hanging over the yard. The fire still crackled in the shed, a faint reminder of the immediate danger, but the larger threat, the one that had slowly strangled the valley, was now laid bare. His gaze swept over the desperate faces of the farmers, then to me, then back to the unwavering Dorothy. For a moment he seemed frozen, a predator caught in a spotlight. Then, with a snarl of pure venom, Clifford Bates took a furious step forward, not towards Dorothy, but directly towards the burning shed, his face a thundercloud of dark intent. Clifford Bates let out a guttural snarl, his polished shoe kicking savagely at a half-burnt bale of hay near the shed. Embers flew, catching a fresh patch of dry stubble, and the fire, which had been sputtering, flared up with renewed menace. It was an act of pure, petty malice, a man consumed by rage. The gasp from the assembled farmers was audible, followed by a murmur of disbelief. "Raymond, the water!" Old Man Henderson cried, scrambling to his feet, his eyes wide with renewed panic. The shed was important, but the nearby watering trough, almost empty, was life. I didn't hesitate. "Phyllis, stay by the house. Everyone, grab anything you can, dirt, blankets, whatever. Keep it from spreading to the trough." My voice, honed by years of giving orders under pressure, cut through the shock. The farmers, finally jolted from their stunned silence, scrambled to obey, kicking dirt, tearing off coats. I doused the smouldering bale Clifford had kicked with the last drops from my canteen, the sudden hiss of steam, a brief victory. Clifford, his face contorted with impotent fury, just stood there, watching us fight his deliberate destruction. With renewed purpose, the small community, united by Dorothy's quiet courage and Clifford's blatant cruelty, worked together. We threw dirt on the creeping flames, beat them back with old feed sacks, anything we could find. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and dying fire, mingled with the smoke and the lingering tension. It took an agonizing 10 minutes, but slowly the fire shrank, coughed its last, and finally succumbed to our combined effort, leaving behind a charred, smoking patch of earth and a shed that was mostly saved. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't a silence of despair, but one of raw, simmering anger. The farmers, their faces smudged with soot and sweat, turned their gaze from the smoking patch of ground to Clifford Bates, who stood rigid, his pale face a mask of defeated rage. The spell he had woven, the illusion of his smooth authority, was broken. Dorothy, still holding the brittle papers, stood tall and steady, a quiet anchor in the stormy silence. "You heard the woman," I said, my voice low but carrying across the hushed yard. "These aren't just rumors, they're facts. The facts about how his family stole and how he's still stealing." I looked around at the faces, etched with hardship and now a dawning comprehension. "He's been choking this valley dry one piece at a time for years." The farmers looked from Clifford to Dorothy, then to me, a quiet understanding passing between us. The immediate danger was gone, but a deeper, older wound had been ripped open. The sun, finally dipping below the western peaks, cast long purple shadows, painting the valley in hues of twilight. Then, as the light softened, a child, still whimpering softly by Phyllis's side, pointed a small, dusty finger. "Look, Mamma," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The little house." Everyone's eyes followed her gaze. High above us, nestled against the darkening canyon wall, catching the last golden rays of the sun, stood my high watch, From this lower vantage point, with the smoke of the fire dissipating, the small cabin was suddenly unmistakably clear. Its stout timber walls, built from the very trees of the mountain, glowed with a warm, reddish hue. The sturdy stone base was rooted firmly into the rock, like it had always been there. The single window facing out over the entire valley seemed to gleam, a watchful eye. Smoke, thin and steady, curled lazily from its small stone chimney, a beacon of life and warmth in the gathering dusk. It wasn't just a shack, it was a fortress, ingeniously blended into the rugged landscape, a secret heart beating on the lonely rim. They saw the hand-hewn door, the careful lines of the roof, the way it sat solid and unyielding against the wildness. It was complete, not just a structure, but a promise made real. A hush fell over the community, deeper and more profound than before. Their eyes widened, taking in the impossible sight. They had thought me gone, defeated, an outcast. They had seen only the lost ranch, the desperate engineer. But now they saw the High Watch, a testament to resilience, to a man who had not just survived, but had built a sanctuary, a command post, right under the nose of their oppressor. They had no words, only the vast quiet expanse of their surprise. They turned to me, their faces a mixture of awe, relief, and a dawning hope. I had returned, but not as the man they knew, and not to the home I had lost. I had built a new one. But what kind of relationship would we forge now, this hidden warrior, and the valley he watched over? The cool night air settled over Henderson's farm, carrying the faint scent of damp ash and scorched earth. The last embers of the fire flickered like tiny, sad stars. The community, their faces still smudged with soot, looked up at my High Watch, then back at me, a silent question in their eyes. Clifford Bates had vanished into the twilight, his defeat etched on his face, but his shadow still lingered. Dorothy, her mission accomplished, gave me a tired, knowing smile and packed up her empty satchel. The quiet understanding passing between us was warmer than any fire. Later, I walked back up to my High Watch. The climb felt different this time, not just a physical challenge, but a journey home. The moonlight painted the canyon in shades of silver and deep blue, and the air was still and crisp, carrying the distant hoot of an owl. As I reached my cabin, the smoke from my own chimney still curled gently into the sky, a welcoming plume. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke wrapping around me. I lit my small lantern, and its warm glow chased away the shadows, making the rough-hewn walls feel cozy and safe. I walked to my window, the one angled perfectly, and looked out over the valley. The lights of the farms twinkled below, and in the distance the golden fields lay dark, a silent monument to what was lost. For so long my heart had ached for that land, for the home I believed was stolen. I'd come back from the war with one purpose, to reclaim it, to set things right. But standing here now, looking down on the world I had fought to protect, a strange calm settled over me. Clifford Bates might have taken the ranch, but he hadn't taken my spirit. He hadn't taken my ability to build, to watch, to plan. He certainly hadn't taken my dignity. I thought about Floyd, my brother. His fear, his weakness, had led him down a dark path. The anger still simmered, but it was mixed with a weariness, a profound sadness for the man he had become. Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever truly go back to that ranch, knowing the history of how it was lost, how it had been poisoned by greed? The thought of walking those fields again, of smelling that familiar earth, didn't fill me with the same desperate longing it once had. It felt complicated, tainted. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Dorothy's papers, her brave words, had given this valley a fighting chance, a weapon against Clifford Bates, I knew I wouldn't abandon these people, not after what they'd faced tonight. I would help them, using everything I had learned up here, everything I had seen. But my place in that fight, I realized, wouldn't be as the angry man trying to reclaim a lost past. It would be as the watchful eye, the quiet strength, the steady hand from above. This high watch, this fortress I had built with my own sore hands, it wasn't just a hideout. It was my choice. It was a declaration. It was where I truly belonged now. The Golden Fields might have been my legacy, but this place, this lonely, beautiful rim, had given me something far more precious: my independence. It had taught me that home wasn't just a place on a map, but a feeling, a purpose, a strength that grew from the deepest parts of yourself, even in exile. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.